I stood in the middle of a luxurious conference room, facing 3 men with the last name Sterling, my husband's brothers, and the CEO of the real estate corporation that was coveting this land. My hand trembled slightly as I set the remote on the table, but my voice was so calm that it surprised even me. Do you think I'm just a naive literature professor? A widow who's easy to deceive, easy to manipulate? Roland, Daniel's eldest brother, frowned, the confidence on his face beginning to waver. Beside him, Victor and Miles exchanged a quick, uneasy glance. "Marissa, let's not make this any harder than it has to be." Roland tried to sound conciliatory. "Harder?" I pressed the button on the remote. The large screen behind me lit up, displaying a detailed map they had never seen before. I tilted my head, giving a faint smile. Perhaps I should call it a surprise. On the screen, the resort project didn't just stop at the publicly announced parcel. It sprawled 3 times larger, covering the entire area they had planned to generously exclude from the deal. Phase 2 of the golf course, I pointed at the map. The real value of Blue Orchid Point isn't $15 million as you told my daughter, but $87 million. Isn't that right, Ms. Carmen? The CEO of Summit Resorts, the woman I had secretly contacted before this meeting, rose from the far end of the table. The 3 Sterling brothers simultaneously turned, their faces flickering with alarm. "Mrs. Sterling is right," Carmen confirmed, her voice firm. "And I'm not at all pleased to learn that you deliberately misled me about having the right to negotiate this land." But that was only the beginning. What I had prepared for these 3 men, those who had made Daniel suffer all his life and now sought to steal the final gift he left me, was far more. I opened another envelope, letting each document slip onto the table. And regarding these papers, tax records, internal emails, statements from former employees. I believe the IRS and the tax authorities will be very interested. Roland's complexion shifted from a furious red to a deathly pale. But to understand why a woman who once only wished for peace in her classroom and small family could stand here with this confidence, you have to go back 3 months. Back to the moment I sat by a hospital bed, holding the hand of the man who had loved me for 17 years, and heard him utter his final plea. "Marissa, promise me, never go to Blue Orchid Point." If you'd like to keep following this journey, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll bring you more real-life stories full of drama and surprises. And before we begin, I want to ask you, if your partner left you with an absolute prohibition, would you keep that promise or break it to uncover the truth? That autumn came early in Tahoe City. The maples turned yellow from September, and I remember vividly the sight of Daniel sitting by the hospital window, his eyes fixed on Lake Tahoe, glittering under the afternoon sun. His gaze was distant, as if trying to memorize every detail for the last time. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, pulling the chair closer to his bed. Daniel turned. The familiar smile flickered briefly, but in his eyes there was something heavy. Sadness? Or a readiness for something inevitable? "I'm thinking about you," he said, his voice weaker than the week before. "About Sophia. About all the things I wanted to say, but never did in time." I held his hand, the once steady hand, now so thin I feared if I squeezed too hard it would break. His skin was cold, his pulse so faint it hurt to feel it. "Marissa." He gripped my hand, gathering all the strength he had left. "There's a house I never told you about. In Incline Village." I froze. In 17 years together, Daniel had never mentioned any other property. "I bought it 4 years ago, but that place, it holds a lot of bad memories, a lot of pain. Why did you buy it?" Daniel looked out the window, his eyes dimming with the setting light. "Because I wanted to change the ending. To turn the place that once held my worst memories into the place holding my greatest love." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Marissa, promise me." His voice trembled. "Promise me you will never go there. I don't want you to see what that place represents. What are you saying? If it's your house, then promise me. Daniel suddenly tightened his grip, his eyes blazing with a plea. Blue Orchid Point. Never go there. Promise me. I looked into the eyes of the man I loved, the man who had given me a home and a deep, steady love for 17 years. I couldn't refuse. I promise. Daniel closed his eyes, a single tear rolling down his cheek. I love you, Marissa. More than anything. 3 days later, his heart stopped at 3:17 a.m. I had fallen asleep beside him, my hand still holding his. The alarm from the monitor blared, nurses and doctors rushed in. But deep inside, I knew. Daniel was gone. He was ready. He had said goodbye. Sophia drove through the night from UCLA. When she arrived, she held me tightly in the hospital corridor, tears streaming down her face. Daddy's gone, sweetheart, I whispered, burying my face in her dark hair so like Daniel's. Mother and daughter clung to each other, sobbing under the harsh fluorescent lights, while the world outside kept spinning as if nothing had happened. There are moments when grief makes time stand still. I thought everything ended there, a chapter closed. But I had no idea that was only the beginning, because Daniel left me more than a promise, more than even love. He left me a secret, a legacy, powerful enough to upend my entire life, and I only truly faced that secret after I met Gregory. 2 weeks after the funeral, I sat in the office of attorney Gregory Harrison, Daniel's close friend from college. He looked at me with eyes both sympathetic and hesitant. Daniel left very specific instructions, Gregory said, then slid toward me a small box and an envelope. Inside the box was an old brass key attached to a keychain shaped like a leaf, engraved with a delicate orchid. The envelope bore familiar handwriting. For Marissa, open when you're ready. This key. I looked up, bewildered. To a house in Incline Village. Daniel bought it 4 years ago. It's called Blue Orchid Point. My heart sank. The very house Daniel had begged me never to visit. But now he wants you to go, Gregory continued. He wants you to see what he built. And there's something even more important. That house. It's extremely valuable. Summit Resorts has offered tens of millions of dollars. I was stunned. Daniel, my humble husband, owned a property worth tens of millions and had kept it secret for 4 years? Gregory paused, then spoke slowly. Daniel's family, his 3 brothers, Roland, Victor, and Miles. They know, and they're preparing to contest the estate. Daniel cut ties with them at 19, and trust me, they're not good people. My head was spinning, too many secrets shattering at once. That night, in the small house where Daniel and I had raised Sophia, I opened the letter. My dearest Marissa, if you are reading this, it means I've left sooner than expected. I'm sorry for the secrets. I'm sorry for the lies, even if they came from love. 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm. The doctors gave me 2 to 5 years. I didn't tell you because I didn't want our final years to be overshadowed by death. Blue Orchid Point is where I grew up, the place holding my worst memories. But I bought it back and turned it into something beautiful, into my final gift to you. During these past 4 years, every business trip was me going there, building, renovating, creating a space I hoped you would love, a place where you could return to the passion you once abandoned. I know I made you promise not to go there. Now I ask you to break that promise. Go, Marissa. Go and see my love. In the study, you will find a laptop. The password is the day we met, followed by the word hope, the word you taught me. I love you more than everything. Daniel. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears streaming endlessly. Daniel had known. He had known he would die, and instead of sharing the burden, he spent his last days creating a gift. But what was that gift? And why, at this moment, did I feel more fear than curiosity? 5 days passed in postponement. Every morning I would look at the key in my hand, then put it back in the drawer, telling myself, tomorrow. Day after day. I knew I couldn't avoid it forever, but a vague fear kept me finding excuses to delay one more day. Sophia came home for the weekend. She sat next to me on the sofa, her eyes settling on the key lying on the coffee table. "What are you afraid of, Mom?" she asked bluntly, in a tone exactly like Daniel's. "I don't know." I sighed. "Maybe afraid of what I'll find." "Your father kept this secret for 4 years, Sophia. 4 whole years. Or maybe he was preparing a gift," she said softly. "That's how Dad always was. Remember your 16th birthday? He pretended to forget, but he'd actually hired your favorite band." I laughed at the memory. That was Daniel, always meticulously preparing surprises in ways no one expected. "Do you want me to go with you?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. This time, I need to go alone." On Monday morning, I started up the old Honda and drove along the shore of Lake Tahoe. Autumn had painted the pine forests gold, and sunlight shimmered on the water as clear as crystal. The drive from Tahoe City to Incline Village was only about 40 minutes, yet it felt like a lifetime. Following the GPS, I turned onto a private road, climbing a hill under the canopy of ancient pines. Then before me appeared an intricately carved wooden gate bearing wrought iron letters, Blue Orchid Point. My hand trembled as I slid the key into the lock. A creak sounded. The gate slowly swung open, as if it had been waiting for me all along. I drove in, then stopped dead. Not the old wooden cabin I had imagined. In front of me stood a stone and timber villa, modern architecture blending seamlessly with nature. The garden was perfectly tended, the lawn lush green, ancient oaks swaying in the breeze. A stone-paved path curved straight to the front door. Daniel, had he done all this in secret? I stepped out of the car, my legs shaky. The crisp air off Lake Tahoe chilled through my sweater, but the cold inside me came from a different fear. The main door was dark oak, with delicate carvings. I tried the key, perfect fit. The lock clicked open with a soft snap. The door swung inward. I stepped into the secret world of the man I thought I had known. A vast living room, a 2-story ceiling, a massive stone fireplace dominating the center. But what took my breath away was not the architecture. It was the paintings. On the walls, on the shelves, in every open space, orchid paintings. Not just one species, but dozens, in every color, painted in multiple styles. My lifelong passion, the love Daniel had always quietly supported, now surrounded me, as if an art gallery had been created just for me. And there, on the table by the window overlooking the garden, sat a silver laptop. On its lid, Daniel had placed a single white orchid. I walked over, gently touching the fragile petal. Tears welled in my eyes. "Daniel, you did all this for me?" At that moment, I had to sit down, clutching the little flower in both hands. I realized that this room alone was enough to make me reconsider everything I had ever believed about Daniel. He hadn't just hidden a house. He had built a secret world, a universe of love and preparation for me to discover only after he was gone. And I wondered, if even this he had kept hidden, how many more truths were waiting inside that laptop? A sound outside startled me. Through the window, I saw a black SUV pulling up behind my car. 3 men stepped out, all bearing an eerie resemblance to Daniel. The straight nose, the familiar almond-shaped eyes. The Sterling brothers had arrived. I stepped back from the window, my heart racing. Daniel had spoken of his family in vague warnings, and now I understood why. Standing before them, my instinct screamed, "Be careful!" A knock on the door, loud and commanding. "Mrs. Marissa, we know you're in there. We need to talk." I stayed silent, backing deeper into the hallway. "Marissa, I'm Roland Sterling, Daniel's brother. This is Victor and Miles. We're here about the house." Of course, not about Daniel. Not to see the woman their brother had loved for 17 years. They were here for the house, the property worth tens of millions. The knocks grew more insistent. I glanced at the laptop. I knew the answers weren't out there, but here, in what Daniel had left. I opened it, typing the password. 12101996 Hope. The day we met, October 1996. And hope, the word I had taught Daniel to relearn after his wounded childhood. The screen lit up. A folder appeared labeled, For Marissa. Inside were hundreds of video files, each dated, starting from the day after the funeral and spanning a full year. My hands trembling, I opened the first file. Daniel's face appeared. Not the gaunt face from the hospital, but the healthy man I remembered, his hair neat, his familiar crooked smile. "Hello, my love," his warm voice said. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And you've come to Blue Orchid Point, even though I begged you not to." My throat tightened. "I guessed you would. I knew you wouldn't resist, especially after Gregory told you about the house. Even now, he knew me so well. I recorded one video for each day of your first year without me. A year to walk beside you through the pain. A year to say all the things I didn't get to say while I was alive." Outside, the knocking had stopped. I peeked through the window. The three men stood by the SUV, pulling out papers, arguing heatedly. Daniel continued. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm, inherited from our father. The doctor said 2 to 5 years. I chose not to tell you or Sophia. I didn't want you living in the shadow of death. I wanted to live fully with you to the end, not die slowly in your eyes. Anger rose in me. He had hidden his illness, made decisions alone, taken away my chance to prepare and consciously cherish every last moment. "I know you're angry now," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "You have every right, but I hope you understand. I did it out of love, not cowardice." Outside, they were on their phones, looking tense like men whose claim was under threat. When I got the diagnosis, I decided to use my remaining time to create something truly meaningful for you. You've always loved orchids, always wished for a private space to grow them. So I returned to the one place no one thought I'd dare go back to, the house I left at 18, and swore never to return. Daniel leaned closer to the camera. "What my brothers don't know is that I bought this house back from our father before he died. He was ruined by gambling and drink, sold it to me cheap, begging me not to tell them. So that was it. They thought they had inheritance rights, but in truth, Daniel had purchased it legally. The video ended with Daniel's signature crooked smile. At that moment, the knocking resumed, louder, more authoritative. "Mrs. Sterling, County Police. Please open the door." I took a deep breath, closed the laptop, pulled the green folder from the drawer, and turned to face whatever awaited outside. I opened the door. In front of me stood a young police officer with a name tag that read Davis. Beside him were 3 hauntingly familiar faces, the Sterling brothers. Their expressions were a blend of smugness, hostility, and blatant contempt. "Mrs. Sterling," the officer began, polite but a little stiff. "I'm Davis. These 3 gentlemen have a court order requesting a property inspection in an inheritance dispute." I smiled, forcing myself to stay calm, the very strength Daniel once said he admired most in me. "Of course, but first, I think you should see this." I handed him the green folder Daniel had prepared. My husband anticipated this exact situation. Roland stepped forward with a contemptuous gesture. "Family disputes are complicated, officer. My sister-in-law is emotional and confused." I cut in, my voice even and firm. "In fact, I am neither emotional nor confused. I am a widow standing on property that legally belongs to me, facing 3 men who happen to share DNA with my husband." The officer bowed his head to read the file. The Sterling's eyes began to flicker. The confidence on their faces wavered. "These documents appear valid." Davis looked up. There's a clear deed of transfer, notarized, along with bank records confirming the original transaction." He turned toward the three men. "I see no grounds to carry out a forcible inspection today." Roland's face flushed red with anger. "Absurd! That woman has no right—" "That woman," I interjected, my tone calm but sharp as a blade, "is Daniel Sterling's wife. And I have every right here." They were forced to back off, reluctantly retreating to the black SUV, exchanging furious glances as they went. The door closed behind them, leaving me standing in the stillness of the room. A tide of mixed feelings surged: grief, loss, but also astonishment at the secrets Daniel had left. The man I thought I knew completely turned out to have depths I had never touched. I leaned my back against the wooden door, closed my eyes, and steadied my breathing. In that moment, I realized this was not just a property dispute. This was the path Daniel had laid out, forcing me to move through fear, to face his family, and more importantly, to face who he truly was and the legacy he left. I understood that if I didn't go on, I would never fully know who Daniel was, and I would never know how strong I, Marissa, could be. That night, I stayed at Blue Orchid Point, the first night in the house Daniel built, or rather, our house. But sleep never came. I lay on the wide bed in a room both unfamiliar and intimate, my mind spinning with the revelations, the faces I had just seen, and the secrets still waiting ahead. At dawn, I decided to explore the house. This was not just an asset. It was a masterpiece of restoration. Daniel had perfectly combined the rustic spirit of the old house with modern comforts. Every room reflected his understanding of me. A library filled with rare books, first editions I had once dreamed of, a reading nook facing the garden, exactly the kind I love for autumn mornings. But when I stepped into the winter garden, the conservatory, I was utterly breathless. A glass-walled space bathed in light, and inside it, a whole world of orchids. Species so rare, I had only ever seen them in academic journals. Right before me stood a blue Cattleya walkeriana, a variety nearly impossible to find, blooming regally like a queen. "Good morning?" I startled and turned. A middle-aged woman emerged from behind the orchid pots, a spray bottle in her hand. "I'm Anita," she introduced herself. "Mr. Daniel hired me to care for the orchids here." "Marissa Sterling." I offered my hand, my voice catching. "But I suppose you already knew." She smiled gently. "Mr. Daniel spoke of you often when he visited. He said you had a special touch with plants, something he could never match." My heart tightened. "Did you know my husband well?" Anita hesitated for a beat. "Well," in the way he allowed. "He was here at least once a month for the past 4 years, overseeing every detail that sounded exactly like Daniel, meticulous, thorough down to the smallest thing. That Cattleya," Anita pointed toward the blue orchid, "it took him nearly 2 years to find. He said it reminded him of a flower you once adored at the Atlanta Botanical Garden 10 years ago." I reeled. I had mentioned that flower only once, yet Daniel remembered. "Did he ever talk about his health?" I asked, my voice trembling. A shadow crossed Anita's face. "Not directly. But in the last 6 months he worked faster, like a man racing against time, that knife twisted deep. I had always assumed it was just work pressure. I never imagined he was pouring everything into a legacy, knowing time was running short." "His brothers came here yesterday," I said, probing gently. Anita's expression hardened. "I know." Ever since Summit Resorts announced the project, they started hovering around. A whole decade of indifference, and suddenly they care. She paused, sighing. Roland, the eldest, always acted like Daniel was someone to be granted favors. Victor's a lawyer, smooth talker. Miles lives in Roland's shadow. When Daniel bought back this house, they mocked him for wasting money, until the resort planning began. What she said matched the fragments Daniel had once revealed. A hard childhood, estrangement, the decision to cut ties. "They'll be back," I murmured. "Certainly." But Mr. Daniel prepared for that. He was always a few steps ahead. Inside the house, I forced myself to eat a little before opening the laptop. The day's video file was waiting. Daniel appeared, seated in the library, the room I had just recognized. "Good morning, my love. I hope you slept well in our new home." He smiled that crooked smile that made my heart ache. "Today, I want you to see something special." The camera followed him down the hall to a locked door. "This room is just for you. The key is in the nightstand drawer, the old silver one engraved with an orchid." I paused the video and ran to the primary bedroom. Sure enough, the silver key lay exactly where he'd described. I followed his directions to the end of the east wing, stopping at a plain door easy to overlook. The key turned smoothly. The door opened. I was stunned. A sun-drenched art studio spread out before me. Easels, canvases, paints, brushes. Everything an artist could dream of, arranged with care and love. I hadn't painted in 15 years. After graduation, I gave up my dream to teach literature, so we could have a stable income, so we could raise Sophia. The years slipped by, and someday became a distant dream. Daniel's voice sounded in the video. "You sacrificed so much for us, Marissa, and painting was the first sacrifice. Though you never complained, I always promised myself I would give it back to you someday." My vision blurred with tears as I took in the room. Every detail was a silent declaration of love. "There's one more thing," Daniel continued. "Open the cabinet beneath the window seat." I did as he said. Inside, neatly placed, was a flat box. When I lifted the lid, I sank to my knees, almost unable to breathe. My paintings, the works I had believed were lost through moves over the years. Daniel had kept them all, protected them for 15 years, only to return them to me now in this perfect space. On top lay a small canvas, the last self-portrait I painted before graduation. A young woman looking ahead, eyes shining. Daniel had asked to keep it the very day I finished it. Tucked into the frame was a handwritten note. "She is still there, Marissa, the woman who once painted with that passion and vision. I only give you the space. The rest is yours." I pressed the note to my chest, flooded with love and loss all at once. The crunch of tires on gravel pulled me out of my emotional haze. From the studio window, I saw 2 SUVs approaching. The familiar black one belonging to the Sterling brothers, and behind it, a silver one I recognized immediately. Sophia had arrived. And just from the way she confidently stepped out of the car and walked straight toward the uncles she had never met, I understood. They had already begun working on her. My daughter, Daniel's daughter, with his black hair and my stubbornness, was smiling, shaking hands with relatives she had never known before. Every fragment of peace I had just found in Daniel's final gift shattered under this new blow. The battle for Blue Orchid Point had just become far more personal. I received a text from Sophia. "Mom, I came with Uncle Roland and everyone. I'm coming inside now. We need to talk, Uncle Roland." They had known each other less than a day, and already she addressed him as if he were family. I locked the studio, wiped my tears, and went out to face this new alliance. They entered without knocking. Sophia carried the ease of a daughter in her own home. The 3 brothers followed behind, like wolves striding after an unwitting guide. "Mom." Sophia hugged me quickly, then pulled back, her eyes sweeping the grand living room. "This place is amazing. Why did Dad never tell us about it?" Before I could answer, Roland stepped forward, the features so like Daniel's that it made my heart ache. "Marissa, I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. We were surprised to see you here, just as you were surprised to see us." His voice was conciliatory, but his eyes calculating. Nearby, Victor and Miles kept a cautious neutrality. Victor carried a leather case that no doubt held legal documents. "Sophia," I said, ignoring Roland, We agreed you wouldn't engage with your father's brothers until you and I had spoken." She flushed slightly. "They called me again this morning with a very reasonable proposal. I thought at least I should hear it directly." Her chin tilted in defiance. "Besides, they're my family too." "Family you didn't even know existed until yesterday?" I reminded her softly. "Because Dad cut them out of our lives," she shot back, "just like he hid this amazing place." "Isn't that strange? What else did he hide?" Her question was a sharp blade, aimed not only at Daniel, but at me. I suddenly realized I was standing before two fears at once: the fear of the secrets Daniel had left, and the fear of losing Sophia into the arms of the men Daniel had avoided his entire life. If I said too little, she would believe them. If I said too much, I might trample over what Daniel wanted revealed in his own way. I had to stay in control, calm, step by step. "Your father had a very complicated relationship with his brothers," I answered slowly. "He had reasons for that distance." Roland waved dismissively. "Ancient history. All siblings fight, especially in a family as difficult as ours. What matters is moving forward together." "Exactly," Sophia nodded, with the seriousness of someone convinced she saw the full picture. Uncle Roland explained, "This house has been in the Sterling family for generations. Dad bought it from Grandpa, but it was always meant to be shared among the brothers." I suppressed a sigh. Barely a day of work, and she was already repeating their version of the story. "And this sudden concern of yours has nothing to do with the luxury resort being built right next door?" I asked lightly. Victor stepped forward, opening his case. "The real estate market is only one aspect of a complex legal picture. We've prepared a fair settlement proposal, honoring Daniel's wishes while also recognizing the family's historical claim to this property." "We're prepared to be very generous," Roland added, placing a paternal hand on Sophia's shoulder. "1/3 for Marissa, 1/3 for Sophia, 1/3 for the three of us. Everyone benefits." Sophia looked at me, clearly persuaded. "It makes sense, Mom. We don't need a place this big. Sell it, and we each walk away with millions, and Dad's family is reunited." "Your father left this property solely to me," I said, locking eyes with Roland. "Not to you, and not to his brothers." "Because of a mistake and misplaced affection," Roland replied smoothly. "In his final years, Daniel wasn't fully sound of mind." A sharp fury ran down my spine. My husband was lucid until his last day. "Then why the secrecy?" Miles spoke up for the first time, his voice softer but no less cutting. "Why hide the purchase from his wife and child? Why complicate matters with lawyers? That's not the act of a rational man. I thought of the videos, the restored house, the art studio, every detail meticulously planned as a final gift. Nothing suggested clouded judgment. "Mom," Sophia said, her voice gentler now, "I know this is hard. Dad's gone, and now we're finding out about all these secrets, but their proposal makes financial sense. You and I would be secure for life." The back door opened behind them. Anita appeared, her face concerned. "Mrs. Sterling, are you all right?" I saw the cars. The three men turned, clearly irritated at the interruption. "This is family business." Roland narrowed his eyes. "Anita is my employee," I said firmly. "She's welcome in my home." "Actually," Victor interjected, "her employment status falls under disputed property, pending resolution of our legal claim." Anita did not flinch. "Mr. Daniel hired me personally. He made me promise to care for this place and for Mrs. Marissa if anything happened to him." "We'll be reviewing all employment contracts," Roland dismissed. I had heard enough. "I think it's time for you to leave." I looked directly at the brothers, then softened my tone as I turned to Sophia. "Except you. You're always welcome to stay." "Mom, you haven't even considered their offer," Sophia protested. "I will consider any written proposal with my own attorney," I replied, "but I will not be pressured inside my own home." Roland's conciliatory mask dropped, revealing the cold businessman beneath.
This property is worth tens of millions with the resort project. We can handle this amicably, or we can make it very difficult. Is that a threat? I asked, calmer than the storm boiling inside me. A reality check, he corrected. You're a college professor going up against a legal battle with opponents who have far greater resources. Daniel may have meant well, but he's left you in an impossible position. I thought of the green folder filled with meticulous documents, the videos proving Daniel's lucidity, and the house itself, his final act of love. I believe my husband knew exactly what he was doing, I said evenly. Now please leave. Sophia, you may stay for lunch if you want. She hesitated, glancing between me and the uncles she had just found. I think I'll go with them now. There's still more to discuss. She kissed my cheek quickly. Think about the offer, Mom. I watched them leave, a cold emptiness spreading in my chest. In just 24 hours, my daughter had been pulled into the orbit of the very men Daniel had spent his life avoiding. Anita waited until the cars were gone before speaking. Mrs. Sterling, there's something you should know. Something Mr. Daniel asked me not to share unless it became absolutely necessary. I turned to her, exhausted but forcing myself to focus. What is it? The true scope of this property, and what's really hidden here. She pointed toward the conservatory. We should take a walk. Some things shouldn't be said inside a house, where the walls might have ears. I followed her across the lawn. The morning sun poured gold over the land my husband had quietly built. One thing I knew for certain, Daniel had foreseen this battle, perhaps even Sophia's vulnerability to her uncle's manipulation. The only question left was, had he prepared me enough to win a fight I never even knew I was about to face? Anita led me through the main conservatory, turning into a tool shed I hadn't so much as glanced at before. Unlike the perfectly renovated structures across the rest of the property, this building kept its original rustic look, deliberately unimproved so it would seem unimportant. Your husband was a careful man, Anita said, taking out an old iron key. After your brothers-in-law's first visit last year, he became even more cautious. They came before? I froze. Daniel never told me. Anita nodded, her voice grave. They showed up unannounced as soon as they heard about the resort project. Mr. Daniel was here overseeing the art studio's construction. At first, they didn't even recognize him. He'd grown a long beard during treatment. A single breeze-light word, treatment, was enough to bring a fresh wave of grief crashing over me. While I taught literature, unsuspecting, my husband was here, ill, building this refuge and fending off predatory brothers. What happened next? He watched them quietly from a distance, then left without revealing himself. That night he reworked the entire site plan. Starting with this, Anita opened the shed door. Inside were only gardening tools and machines, dust drifting in sunbeams through the slats. She went straight to the back corner, pushed a few boxes aside, and revealed a flush trap door set into the concrete floor. He had this entrance installed last winter. The crew thought they were building a wine cellar. She heaved up the heavy lid, revealing a sturdy ladder descending into darkness. What is this place? I asked. He called it the vault, Anita smiled. I call it genius. We followed a tunnel about 30 meters long. At the end was a wide room, filing cabinets packed tight, a desk with a bank of computers, walls covered with maps and papers. Welcome to Daniel's war room, Anita said, a trace of pride in her voice. Everything he collected on his brothers, their business dealings, and the true value of Blue Orchid Point. I stepped to the nearest wall, a detailed map outlining not only our parcel, but miles beyond. Red marks pinned the resort site, with handwritten notes on valuation, construction phases, and impacts on the real estate market. I don't understand, I turned to Anita. When did Daniel learn about the project? Not at the start. He bought this place simply to renovate it for you, that's all. But about 2 years ago, when Summit Resorts began preliminary surveys,
He hired a real estate consultant to assess the impact on Blue Orchid Point. Anita pointed at the map. They discovered what the developer planned to hide until they finished buying up land. The project's true scale is 3 times what was announced. I studied the markings, boundaries pushed far beyond anything the press had mentioned. Phase 2 will include a golf course that requires the land bordering ours, Anita continued. They bought almost everything they need, everything except Blue Orchid Point. So our position blocks their expansion, I concluded, the picture taking shape. Without this parcel, the project loses half its expected value. He confirmed that with 3 independent experts. Anita nodded. This place is worth far more than his brothers thought. She pulled a thick file from a cabinet. But that's not all. Daniel documented a decade of questionable business practices by the 3 of them: tax evasion, insider trading, embezzling client funds, enough to ruin their careers if exposed. I skimmed page after page, printed emails, financial statements, testimony from former employees. All of it bore Daniel's familiar stamp: meticulous, airtight, leaving no gaps. He had built an unassailable case. Why did he make it so extensive? I asked. Because he knew the moment he was gone, they would come, Anita replied, pulling out a chair for me. He wanted you to have ammunition in hand. I thought of Roland's confidence, Victor's slippery legalese, and the speed with which they'd pulled Sophia into their orbit. He planned for almost everything. Not everything. Anita shook her head slightly. He didn't anticipate how quickly they'd reach your daughter. The ache for Sophia flared back. They're manipulating her with half-truths and promises of money. Striking straight at the wound of losing her father, Anita nodded. She's grieving. Suddenly someone offers blood ties and family history. That's a powerful pull on a mourning girl. Sophia, his child, with a mind for analysis and a love of puzzles just like Daniel's. He was gone. She was adrift, easy to be drawn toward anyone promising something labeled family.
What do I do now? I asked softly, almost to myself. That depends on what you want, Anita said. You could sell everything and be rich, but you might lose your daughter for good. You could wage a legal war using this trove. You might win, but the family rift could grow worse. Or what? Or you do exactly what Mr. Daniel always did, stay 3 steps ahead and choose the path no one expects. I walked the room, my eyes stopping on a small framed photo on the desk. Daniel as a teenager, standing beside a prize-winning orchid, his face alight with a kind of innocence I rarely saw in the man he became. His first cattleya, Anita noticed my gaze, one of the few bright spots in a childhood here. His brothers destroyed it while he was at school, just to hurt him. Another piece clicked into place. The dazzling conservatory and the art studio, these were not only gifts for me, they were Daniel reclaiming what had been stolen from his youth. I picked up the frame. In my mind, a plan began to take shape. Anita, can we get network access for the computer down here? I want to watch Daniel's videos from here. Yes, she nodded. The entire property has secure networking. He covered everything. Good. I need to watch the next few videos. Look ahead a bit. I drew a steadying breath. Then I want you to set up 3 meetings, one with Sophia, just the 2 of us, far from her uncle's influence, one with an attorney, and finally, I looked up at the wall of evidence. I want to speak with Summit Resort's executive team. Anita smiled, for the first time since we'd descended. You're doing what Mr. Daniel would approve of. I'm doing what's worthy of the man who loved me enough to build all of this, I corrected, hearing my own voice grow steadier. And I'll need your help. Anything you need, Anita said firmly. Mr. Daniel gave me a second chance when no one else would. I owe him, and therefore, I owe you. This was another side of Daniel I'd never known, a quiet generosity that reached beyond our small family, changing other lives in silence. We left the bunker, carefully concealing the entrance. As the hatch thudded shut, I felt a strange cord still linking me to Daniel, not the drowning grief of these past weeks, but a kind of companionship that continued even with him gone. He had left me not only security and assets, but also the tools and knowledge to cut my own path. The Sterling brothers thought they were facing a naive widow, not worth worrying about. They had no idea what awaited them. The next 48 hours, I barely slept. Driven by resolve and the growing clarity in my mind, I watched an entire week of Daniel's videos in a single night. Each one revealed another layer of strategy and foresight. "They'll try to divide and conquer," he warned in one recording, as if speaking directly into my present. "Roland will play the friendly face. Victor is the legal threat. Miles is the silent observer. And they'll target Sophia. She's the easiest path to undermine your position." In another video, he held up documents obtained through county office contacts. Summit Resorts is determined to keep Phase 2 a secret until they finish land acquisition. If they learn we know about the golf course, our bargaining power triples. Armed with Daniel's insight and my own sharpening instincts, I arranged to meet Sophia at a cafe in town, far enough to escape both the Sterling's influence and the emotional pull of Daniel's sanctuary. She arrived 15 minutes late, defensive from the moment she sat down. "I can't stay long. Uncle Roland's taking me to meet some investors this afternoon." "Uncle Roland," I repeated softly. 3 days, and already so close. Her cheeks flushed. "They're kinder and more welcoming than you've been." "You're treating Dad's family like enemies." I sipped my coffee, choosing my words carefully. "Remember your narrative theory class you loved freshman year? The same story can change completely depending on who tells it. What does that have to do with this? You've only heard their version." "I just ask that you consider there might be another perspective. Your father's." "Dad's gone," she said bluntly, pain flashing across her face. "And clearly he didn't trust us enough to tell us about this place while he was alive." I pulled a tablet from my bag. "Actually, he left something for both of us." "What is it?" "Your father made videos, Sophia. Hundreds of them. Messages to guide me, to guide us, after he was gone." I turned the screen and opened a file labeled "For Sophia When You Need It." Her face went pale. "Dad made videos? He knew he was going to die?" "Your father was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm 3 years ago," I said softly, finally forced to lay bare the truth. "He chose not to tell us. He didn't want us watching him fade away. No way." But doubt crept into her voice. "He would have told me. Watch the video, Sophia. Listen to your father." For a few silent seconds, I saw the two forces tugging at her, the men cloaked as family, and the real father in these videos. If she opened her heart, we might pull her back. If not, I could lose her to them. I kept my gaze calm, as if to say without words, "You are safe when you listen to him." With trembling hands, she pressed play. Daniel's face appeared, healthy, vibrant, his familiar crooked smile crinkling his eyes. "Hello, my wonderful girl. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And knowing you as I do, you're probably angry about the secrets I kept." He chuckled softly. "You never did like being left in the dark, even as a little kid." Tears pooled in Sophia's eyes as Daniel went on. "I should have told you about my illness. I should have given you time to prepare, to ask all the questions you're so good at asking. But I was selfish. I wanted our last years to feel normal, not overshadowed by a diagnosis." He leaned closer to the camera. "There's something else you need to know about my brothers. The rift wasn't petty arguments. They stole my inheritance when I was 19, forged documents in my name while I was at college. When I threatened to expose them, they threatened to drag me down as an accomplice." Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes locked on the screen. "I left Lake Tahoe, moved to the city, met your mother, built a life, raised you. That was more than enough for a lifetime." His face hardened. "But they never changed. No matter what they tell you now, remember this. They want control of this property not out of love, but out of greed, and they will use anyone, even my daughter, to get it." The video froze on Daniel's worried face. Sophia sat motionless, tears rolling silently. "He was protecting us," she whispered at last, "not just because he was sick." I nodded gently. "They're not the family they pretend to be. They're opportunists, seeing you as the shortest path to what they want." She wiped her tears. Anger began to replace grief. "They lied to me, didn't they?" "About everything. Except that the land is worth millions. That part is true, but they didn't tell you about the full resort project or why this property is the linchpin of the developer's plan." I saw Daniel's spark in her eyes, the analytical mind flickering to life. "They're trying to trick us." "Us?" I echoed, warmth rising in my chest. "I mean, I'm on your side." She exhaled, then looked down, almost ashamed. "I just wanted to feel closer to Dad, through his family. They had stories from his childhood, pictures I'd never seen. Sweetheart, I understand." I squeezed her hand. "Grief makes us vulnerable in ways we don't expect." Sophia straightened, her expression shifting from fragile to resolute. So like Daniel, it hurt my heart. "What's the plan?" I smiled. For the first time since this began, I felt true hope. "First, tonight you and I meet with the lawyer Gregory recommended. Not the family attorney your uncles want. Tomorrow morning, we have an appointment with Summit Resorts. Why? Because knowledge is power. Now we know what they don't, the true value of this land to the developers." I showed her the documents from Daniel's war room. They think they're facing a naive widow and a young girl. It's time they saw who they're really up against. For the first time since Daniel's death, Sophia laughed, a real laugh. "Dad always said you were the smartest person he'd ever met." That beneath the quiet literature professor was a strategist who could outthink anyone, if only given enough reason. "He really said that?" I asked, still astonished. "All the time," she smiled through the last of her tears. "He also said the biggest mistake anyone could make was underestimating Marissa Sterling. That night, with Sophia at my side, I laid out the full plan to the attorney Daniel had specifically chosen for this exact situation." The professional concern on his face quickly shifted to open admiration as he absorbed the scope of the strategy. "Mrs. Sterling," he said at last, "your husband once told me you would surprise me with your strategic mind." He was right. My husband, I replied, was right about many things, including his belief that I would not only survive his death, but rise stronger from the fire of grief and betrayal. The Sterling brothers arrived at Blue Orchid Point at exactly 10 a.m., just as I had predicted, 3 days after the meeting with Sophia. Their familiar black SUV rolled over the gravel drive with the swagger of men convinced victory was merely a formality. Behind it came a sleek silver sedan I didn't recognize, likely a lawyer or financial advisor. From the study window, I watched. Today, I was no longer the widow in a cardigan they had seen before. I stood ready in a tailored suit, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering. I wanted them to face not a grieving woman, but the adversary Daniel had always known I could become. "They're here," I said. Sophia emerged from the library, poised in her navy dress. On her wrist gleamed Daniel's watch, catching the morning light. "Are you ready?" she asked, her eyes carrying both worry and determination. "Completely." I squeezed her hand. "Remember, let them dig their own hole first." Anita entered. "The others have arrived through the back entrance." "They're waiting in the dining room, as you requested." "Perfect." I nodded. The doorbell rang. Anita opened it, her voice calm, measured with respect. "Good morning, gentlemen. Mrs. Marissa and Miss Sophia are expecting you." They entered as if the house were still theirs. Roland led, Victor clutched a leather briefcase, Miles trailed silently. Behind them walked a silver-haired man in a finely tailored suit, the austere presence of a CFO. "Marissa," Roland inclined his head, his smile never reaching his eyes, You were wise to agree to this meeting. This is Mr. Chen, CFO of Sterling Investments. He'll provide clarity on the asset's valuation. Clearly, they intended to drown me in numbers and legal jargon. I offered a polite smile. How considerate. Please, follow me. I led them into the dining room. The long table was set, documents at each seat, water, coffee, everything staged like a corporate negotiation. They sat down, self-assured, certain they had already won. I remained standing at the head of the table. First, thank you for your previous proposal, I began. It was very educational. Roland's smile widened, mistaking my civility for surrender. We're glad you've reconsidered. With Mr. Chen here, we can discuss fair division. Yes, division? I picked up the remote on the table. That is exactly what I'd like to discuss. I pressed a button. A large screen descended at the end of the room, startling them. Another click, and a detailed survey of Blue Orchid Point appeared, highlighting the full 10 hectares, not the 4 they had conveniently included in their proposal. This is the complete survey, I said clearly. All 10 hectares, not just the fraction you accounted for. Victor frowned. The Western Tract is conservation land, undevelopable. We omitted it to simplify, I echoed with a cold smile. Or to conceal. Another click. The resort's master plan appeared, overlaying the map, including Phase 2 with the golf course Summit Resorts had tried to keep hidden. Mr. Chen leaned forward, his mask of composure cracking as his eyes scanned the screen. As you can see, I continued, Phase 2 of the project falls squarely onto the Western Tract, the very land you dismissed for your so-called fair division. Roland flushed crimson. Those plans are speculative. Sterling Investments analysis. I didn't respond. Instead, I let silence hang heavy, so taut that the tick of the clock echoed like a hammer. They shifted, exchanged uneasy glances. I stood still, hand resting lightly on the remote, staring at Roland. I wanted them to believe they still had leverage, just long enough to pull the final curtain. In fact, another voice cut through the room as a side door opened. Those plans have been confirmed by Summit Resorts' board of directors. All 3 brothers turned and froze. Carmen Alonso, CEO of Summit Resorts, strode in, followed by my attorney and 2 sharply dressed executives. What is this? Roland snarled, half rising. This, I smiled, is a meeting about the true value and future of Blue Orchid Point. Mrs. Alonso has expressed significant interest after reviewing the documents Daniel prepared. Mr. Chen's head whipped toward the brothers, fury blazing. You told me you had exclusive negotiating rights. Clearly, I've been deceived. Not at all, my attorney interjected, placing additional files on the table. Mrs. Sterling holds sole uncontested ownership, supported by notarized documents and bank records. The materials you presented to Mr. Chen are utterly void. Roland slammed a palm on the table. This estate has been Sterling family property for generations. Daniel had a moral obligation. Moral obligation? Sophia's voice rang out, trembling yet fierce. Like when you stole Dad's inheritance, forged his signature while he was away at college, and threatened him if he exposed you? The room fell silent. The brothers' faces drained of color. What is she talking about? Mr. Chen barked. Perhaps this will clarify, I said calmly. My attorney distributed sealed envelopes. These are copies of Daniel's records, evidence of tax evasion, insider trading, embezzlement. Some matters may be past statute, but the IRS would certainly find the rest compelling. Victor flipped through the pages, panic flickering. This is family business. No, I cut in, my voice sharp as steel. This is a decades-long pattern of fraud, and it continued when you misled partners and tried to secure leverage here with deception. Roland's voice cracked. What do you want, Marissa? I want you out of Blue Orchid Point, permanently. End the dispute. Stop manipulating my daughter. In return, these documents never leave this room. Mr. Chen stood abruptly. It's clear I was misled. Mrs. Sterling, from this moment forward, I will negotiate directly with you. He shot the brothers a look of withering contempt before storming out. The rest of the meeting unraveled quickly. The once confident wolves now sat subdued, signing the settlement my attorney laid before them. As they left, defeated, exposed, bound by their own signatures, I looked at Sophia. She gave me a faint smile, but her eyes shone with pride. Daniel had prepared us, even from beyond the grave. Blue Orchid Point remained intact, not fragmented, not sold off, but preserved as the legacy of our true family, Sophia and me. Beside me, Anita whispered, "He would be proud." Watching the dust fade behind their retreating cars, I felt a strange fusion, victory mingled with grief, strength rising from what once was only weakness. "This was just the first battle," I murmured, "but it was the decisive one." And I won, not only with what Daniel left me, but with the strength he always believed I had, even when I never believed it myself. The weeks following our victory over the Sterling brothers blurred into a whirlwind of tasks, finalizing legal settlements, meetings with Summit Resorts to lay out strict terms of cooperation, and combing through every last detail Daniel had left hidden at Blue Orchid Point. Sophia stayed with me during that time. Her initial anger over her father's secrets slowly softened into appreciation, and eventually gratitude. Each morning, we opened one of Daniel's videos together, as if he were still sitting beside us. Those recordings weren't just instructions. They were tender guidance from a husband, a father, even after he was gone. "Did you ever suspect?" Sophia asked one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the lake. "About Dad's illness or how much he had prepared?" I thought for a long moment. There were small signs, but I didn't see them for what they were. The way he insisted on revising legal papers, the way his eyes lingered on us at dinner, as if memorizing, his sudden obsession with photos, capturing every ordinary moment. Sophia smiled sadly. "I thought it was just a midlife crisis." "In a way it was," I said softly, "but not for the reasons we imagined." The greatest change in Daniel, I now understood, was that he no longer said, "someday." The man who once promised, "One day we'll see Europe, one day we'll renovate the kitchen, one day I'll learn photography," suddenly made it all real. Now I knew he had been racing against time. When I met with Summit Resorts, I set conditions no one expected. Environmental preservation first, strict development limits, and complete protection for the Orchid Conservatory and the art studio. Some negotiators frowned, but CEO Carmen Alonso looked at me with something else in her eyes. "Daniel always said you wouldn't choose the easy path, you'd choose the right one," she told me. He was right. A month later, I stood in the art studio Daniel had built for me. After more than 10 years away from a canvas, my hand trembled as I lifted a brush, slowly rediscovering confidence. Before me bloomed the rare green orchid Daniel had hunted for years, because of one passing comment I'd made long ago. Now it flowered in the conservatory, endless inspiration. Sophia handed me a laptop. "Today's video is different. You should watch it alone." The label read, "For Marissa, when she begins to paint again." Daniel appeared on the screen, sitting in this very studio when it was still empty. "Hello, my love," he smiled. "If you're watching this, it means you've returned to painting, the passion you gave up for our family." Tears streamed as I touched the screen. He spoke not of money or property, but of legacy, of giving me back the freedom to live fully as myself. Behind him, a canvas had been left waiting, blank, ready for this day. I knew at last I was ready. The painting took shape slowly. In the background, a house, layered with time. First, the abandoned land Daniel had bought. Then, the childhood home he had reclaimed. Finally, the present, glowing with light. At the center, 2 figures, a grown woman and a young girl,
Sophia and me, walking forward together. Behind us, faint yet unmistakable, Daniel stood holding out a green orchid. When I finished, I hung it in the great room. Sophia stared at it, whispering, "This is Dad. This is us. Past, present, future." I smiled, wiping my tears. Yes, this is legacy. Not what is left behind, but what continues to live. Just as I thought everything had come full circle, the doorbell rang. Anita entered, her face hesitant. "Roland Sterling is at the gate, alone. He looks different." My heart skipped. I thought I was done with them. But the story had one more chapter. Roland was thinner, his eyes hollow. He confessed he had terminal cancer, then pulled out an old photograph. 3 boys under a tree, Daniel the youngest, cradling a potted orchid. For the first time, I saw Roland not as a predator, but as a man defeated by his own choices. I walked him through the conservatory. Among the orchids Daniel had tended, hatred slowly dissolved. A chapter finally closed, the way it should have long ago. Weeks later, I opened Daniel's final video. He smiled, that familiar crooked smile. "This isn't the end, Marissa. This is a new beginning. You've always been the true strength in us." As the screen went dark, I understood. Blue Orchid Point was no longer a place of fear. It was home, the place where I found myself again, and where Daniel's legacy continues to live. And that was my story, from a desperate promise to a victory not only in law, but in spirit. Daniel may be gone, but his love and vision live on through every stone, every orchid, and every painting I create. If you believe that true strength does not come from wealth, but from the power we give each other to live authentically, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories where truth, love, and legacy continue to intertwine.